Thank you very much, Pam, for your introduction and kind words. Uh, the way the talk is going to work tonight is that Elizabeth is going to give a short biographical introduction, um, and then I'm going to take you through one of the sermons, which I will present together with Elizabeth. Uh, so over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay. Um, just wanted to say first that I'm giving quite a short biographical introduction, but I felt it was important for you to know a little about who Meister Eckhart is, because he's described as a mystic. And you might think, oh, he was kind of holed up into a little room all on his own. And this is far from the truth. He was very worldly, in fact, very successful, very studious, but he certainly was completely active in service in the world, as you will understand when you hear the talk. So, and I'd like to mention that a lot of this biography comes from a book called Meister Eckhart and the Bhagavad Gita by Linda Brown Holt. And there will be up at the end on the screen, we'll put the references and sources. So Meister Eckhart was a 14th, I'm going to share my screen.
Elizabeth, can you just be aware that your screen is shaking quite a bit?
Oh, sorry, I'm leaning on the table again. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, that is not the right one. Keeps jumping further on than it should. So
That was it.
yeah, this is it. So Meister Eckhart was a 14th century theologian and friar in the Dominican order. In recent times, he's been referred to as a Christian mystic. He didn't call himself a mystic. He lived from about 1260 to 1328. The exact dates are unknown. Little is known about his early life or family, except that they were landowners. He entered the Dominican order at the age of about 15 in what is now modern Germany, and received orders by 1278, after which he went to study further in Paris. Then at the age of 33, which is in 1293, he served as lecturer at the University of Paris. 9 years later, after completing more studies, he assumed the external Dominican chair of theology, placing him at the apex of academic success in medieval Europe. And it was at this time that he became known as Meister, which was a customary title. So you can see he's very much involved in worldly matters, even though they're based on theology. By then, Eckhart was regarded as one of the most brilliant and charismatic theologians and preachers in Europe. He became responsible for 47 convents in his role as church leader, which was known as provincial, of the northern province of Saxonia, and had many other duties which took him all over Europe. And here's an interesting note, that in all these travels around Europe, he traveled around on foot, including, you'll hear right at the end, when he was getting on for 70, he walked 250 miles. After another period as external Dominican chair of theology in Paris from 1311 to 13, he was appointed vicar general in Strasbourg, which was known for its active Dominican monastic life. It was also a center for female theology and mysticism, and for the Beguines, which were communities of laywomen dedicated to prayer, poverty, and good works, but they were not bound by monastic vows, so they weren't proper nuns, although they're often called nuns. But now the church disapproved of these Beguines because they encouraged independent thinking, as well as actions that could not always be controlled. some of them engaging in emotional and highly visionary forms of mysticism. It's possible that Eckhart's previous success in working with nuns may have made him seem to be an ideal emissary to prevent such outbreaks of religious hysteria. What the authorities would not have known at that time is the extent to which their theologies, that is of the Beguines, mirrored his own convictions. Eckhart became known for his unorthodox way of expressing conventional church teachings. His work with the Beguines led to great enthusiasm for his teachings from them, but diminished his status as a Dominican theologian in Europe. This led to his persecution and condemnation for heresy by those in the church who were in tune with a growing wave of inquisitional fervor in the 1320s. In 1323, he was called to Cologne by the archbishop there to answer claims of heresy, and he was the first theologian to be tried for heresy in the Middle Ages. Although the Archbishop of Cologne was closely linked to the Pope, when the Pope conducted an investigation into Eckhart in 1325 and 6, Eckhart was cleared of unorthodoxy. The Archbishop, however, prepared his own case, which resulted in Eckhart appearing before the Diocesan Inquisitorial Commission. So the Archbishop of Cologne was just out to get Eckhart. He was found not guilty of heresy, but was summoned to the papal court in Avignon, where he died before his trial came up, perhaps due to his advancing age and the fact that he had had to walk 250 miles to get there. He was condemned posthumously and only returned to public attention in 1857, over 5 years after his death.
500 years.
500, sorry, what did I say? 500 years, sorry, when German scholar Franz Pfeiffer issued an edition of his work. His works consist of about 100 sermons in German, which were mostly delivered to and taken down by the Beguines, to whom he preached. In addition, there are more academic works in Latin for the benefit of the Dominican orders. This talk will be centered on a sermon delivered on Christmas Day and concerns the most important concept in Eckhart's teaching, namely the birth of the word in the soul. Now, just a word on the translations. There have been several translations of the sermons in the last 150 years. This is not an easy accomplishment, as they are written in medieval Middle High German. One factor the translators have to consider is whether the manuscripts can be verified as being the genuine works of Eckhart. Tonight, we will be using the much praised translation by Maurice O'Connell Walsh, published in 1979, many of whose translations are available as a free download, and I'll give you the details later. So that is the end of just the background to Eckhart's life. And I will now hand over to Neville to give you the spiritual teaching of Meister Eckhart.
Just one thing I would add to what Elizabeth has said, that, and this is why the church objected and started bringing these cases against Eckhart. And that was because he said he came out with statements like, God and I are one. And, you know, he was preaching this, and he described it in those in that way to the learned masses, without giving any reference to the role that the church would play. So the church took against him, and that's why they objected and tried to convict him of heresy. An overriding message in this evening's talk is the importance of finding stillness within. And so I would like to start with a short period of stillness. Um, so if you could allow yourself to fall silent. Thank you. What a piece of work is man!
Shakespeare.
How noble in reason! How infinite in faculty! In form and moving, how express and admirable! In action, how like an angel! In apprehension, how like a god! The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. In this famous soliloquy from Shakespeare's Hamlet, we have a glorious description of human potential. But is this how we see ourselves? Eckhart sees us ultimately as nothing less than sons of God. In many traditions, a state of higher consciousness is referred to. In the Mandukya Upanishad, it is the fourth state of consciousness, described as beyond empirical dealings, uninferable, indescribable, unthinkable, in which all phenomena cease. And this appears in the proem of the Secret Doctrine, in the first fundamental principle. A good question to ask is, have we ever experienced this higher state ourselves? Although it is not possible to describe this state, Plato refers to us as having a memory of our source, and that somewhere deep within we remember who we really are. We remember our own divinity. Eckhart expresses this state in a different way. He speaks of the birth of the Word, which he says is deep in the ground of our being, and I am sure that he is referring to this same state where we are fully united with God, in which there is no difference and therefore no duality. There is no more me and God. Eckhart has been described as a mystic, and in recent years has been embraced and adopted by many other different traditions. But we must not forget that Eckhart is first and foremost a theologian and Dominican monk, and therefore he expresses his message using the language of the Catholic Church. We must therefore not become too concerned with the particular language he uses, which might be unfamiliar to us. To us as students of theosophy, his language might come across as unacceptable, owing perhaps to some long-held ideas and beliefs about the Church and what it has stood for over the centuries. Initially, we might also be philosophically opposed to it on account of the many injustices it has perpetrated. We might even object to the word God. Our idea of God, however, is likely to be far away from Eckhart's. And Eckhart's is likely to be very far from what the mainstream church was teaching at the time. Eckhart's message is far from mainstream, and what he was saying had repercussions later in his life when it brought him into conflict with the authorities. They took exception to some of the statements he made, such as,
God is neither good, nor better, nor best. When I call God good, I speak falsely as if I were to call white black.
he may have had his enemies within the church, but he was popular with the people, and they travelled from afar to hear him preach. I suspect that part of the problem of the authorities was because they thought that what he was saying was liable to be misinterpreted by the masses, who, upon hearing such statements, might, as a result, question the status quo as it was in the church. Before we look at this particular sermon, please note that a word that Eckhart often uses is creatures. And by this he means everything that is not God. This includes all things and ideas. In fact, anything that is brought in from outside, which is why he often interchanges the word creatures with images. Our theme tonight is the birth of the Word, which is the subject of the very first sermon in the Walsh edition. It was delivered on Christmas Day, and it begins with the following words.
Here in time, we are celebrating the eternal birth which God the Father bore and bears unceasingly in eternity, because this same birth is now born in time, in human nature. St. Augustine says, "What does it avail me that this birth is always happening, if it does not happen in me? That it should happen in me is what matters." We shall therefore speak of this birth, of how it may take place in us and be consummated in the virtuous soul, whenever God the Father speaks his eternal word in the perfect soul.
Elizabeth, have you got the slide for that?
It's up there, isn't it? It's on my screen.
Oh, it's not on mine.
Isn't it?
No.
Well, I don't understand.
Can we find out whether everybody's seeing the slides?
Pam, are you seeing here in time we are celebrating? No.
No.
What are you seeing then?
We've still got the original one, Meister Eckhart.
What, you mean
the very first one you put up.
You haven't had any of the... Is it changing now?
No.
Yes? No.
Only stuck on number 2.
Oh no.
But you also need to click on start slideshow from the beginning, Elizabeth. We're seeing what you're seeing, all the slides.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sorry. Why didn't you tell me?
Okay, I will read this again.
But can you just hold on, Dame, because I'm not using my Mac. So can you tell me how I'd start the slideshow?
Where it says there, that's right, yeah.
There's slideshow.
Left-hand side, top left, from the beginning.
Oh. I'm very sorry. So you never saw any of that either?
No.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to reread this. Here in time, we are celebrating the eternal birth which God the Father bore and bears unceasingly in eternity. Because this same birth is now born in time, in human nature. St. Augustine says, "What does it avail me that this birth is always happening, if it does not happen in me?
Hello, Neville.
That it should happen in me is what matters. We shall therefore speak of this birth, of how it may take place in us and be consummated in the virtuous soul, whenever God the Father speaks the eternal word in the perfect soul." Note right from the beginning, he talks about something which comes up very often, the fact that we're talking about here in time because it's Christmas Day and they're celebrating Christmas, so the birth of Jesus. But he immediately says, here in time we are celebrating the eternal birth, which God the Father bore and bears unceasingly in eternity, because this same birth is now born in time. People have tried to find out where St. Augustine said what is quoted there, but no one has managed to do that so far, so we're not quite sure that St. Augustine did say this, but it's a very good question.
Sorry, Neville, could I just make a point? I see someone has their mechanical hand up, but we're having questions at the end. You can type it into the chat or save it to the end. That's Kat who's got her hand up.
Okay. Please also know that Eckhart tells us later that this is only for the good and perfected man who has walked and is still walking in the ways of God, not of the natural, undisciplined man, for he is entirely remote from and totally ignorant of this birth. Now, you may think after hearing that that counts most of us out because we're certainly not perfect. But we're all aspiring in that way. Eckhart draws our attention next to the three questions which he's going to pose and which he's going to answer. And they are, where this birth happens.
Can you move the slides, please? We're not seeing the slides moving.
Have you got this next slide?
Has it not? The slide hasn't gone up.
No.
It is. We are still on slide 5. It's still the same.
Elizabeth, close it down and open it up again might help. The PowerPoint.
Okay.
Oh, there it is. It's come up.
Yeah, I know, but that's not what we want to see.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Where this birth happens.
I know, but it's just a little screen.
Okay.
Not a slideshow. It's.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't know what's going wrong. I don't. Oh, now it's asking me what I want to save it as. So I'll go from beginning. Is it changing page now?
No, it isn't.
No.
I think you have to click on them, Elizabeth. I think you have to click on them as you go down. If you click on number 2, it'll go down to number 2 on the left.
Yeah, but I can only see the same screen you're seeing.
Yeah, if you click down, you have control of it. The host have control of it. The
I
host.
know. Well, is that good enough?
I think what's happening, Elizabeth, you've got the screen switched round. We're seeing your presenter view, and you are seeing what we should be seeing.
Oh,
that's what's. I don't know how you do it on a Mac, but it's.
This isn't a Mac.
Okay.
It's because it's not my Mac. Anyway, I'll have to do it like this. All right.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, everyone.
No, it's great so far. loving the dialogue.
Okay. Okay. So.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
So these are the 3 questions that we're going to address in this sermon. Where this birth happens, which includes where the soul is receptive, whether one should do anything to precipitate this happening, and what are the benefits that accrue from this happening. These things are impossible to describe because they don't accord with the world that we normally inhabit. And so they have to be described in terms of the world that we do know. There is no special place, there is no entering, there is no birth, and therefore we use the term as it were, because we understand we have an idea of what birth means. There is no birth because, as Eckhart said, this is happening continuously, eternally. In answering these questions, Eckhart often refers to the ground of being. He describes it as
the purest thing that the soul is capable of, in the noblest part, the ground, indeed in the very essence of the soul, which is the soul's most secret part. There is the silent middle, for no creature ever entered there, and no image, nor has the soul there either activity or understanding. Therefore, she is not aware there of any image, whether of herself or of any other creature.
into this ground no creature ever entered. And please remember that creature is any created thing, thought, or idea. This ground is beyond understanding. There is no activity, and it is completely silent, still, and empty. Just as I say those words, I realise that even saying those words, we're trying to put words on them. Of course, in another sense, it is very, very full. Where it says it's empty, it is actually very full. But the idea is that we're creating a space. We're allowing there to be a space. It is the noblest, purest part of our being. It is here where the word is spoken. This is not an event, but he states that it is continuously happening, and therefore it takes place in eternity, not in time. In this ground, the birth of the word takes place without mediation. It does not come from outside, and therefore needs no channel through which to come. At this point in the sermon, Eckhart refers to the soul's powers, which have to be completely withdrawn. The word powers needs a little explanation. According to Eckhart, there are 7 of these powers, and he says that they have to be completely withdrawn. Three higher powers are intellect, memory, and will. And the four lower powers are the lower intellect, anger, desire, and the senses. When I first read this, I was surprised to see anger as one of the powers. Then I read in an essay by Tim Addy, who is a Plato scholar, that in one of Plato's dialogues, the soul is likened to a winged chariot, which is guided by a charioteer, and the charioteer represents reason. But it is propelled by two horses, and they are anger and desire, which, and it says that they symbolize the primary powers of the soul. But the writer of the essay, Tim Addy, says anger, in this context, of course, should not be understood in common terms. It is not the negative emotion normally denoted by the word, but rather the harmonizing power which allows reason and desire to act as one in their hunt for the beautiful. Coming back to Eckhart, he is saying that the birth of the word takes place without mediation of any kind, even of the higher intellect or the will. All of these powers play no part. These powers are concerned with outside. They are in creation, in time. And this birth of the word takes place beyond time, in eternity. Our normal way of achieving anything is to develop our powers, and through them accumulate knowledge and anything else we want to possess. But what Eckhart is telling us here is that this knowledge is of a different order. It is not to be accumulated. And in fact, he says that we have to leave the powers outside. The true knowing of which he speaks does not come from the outside, inwards, but comes from the inside, outwards. As no creature has ever entered the ground of being, it is empty, and it is therefore at its most receptive. Into this emptiness, God must enter, as it were. Although, of course, this is only an expression, as God was always there in eternity. Eckhart's scholar and contemporary Dominican friar Richard Woods describes this birth more as a welling up from the fathomless abyss rather than an entering. Elsewhere in his writings, Eckhart says that one has to leave behind all creatures. That when one leaves behind all creatures, God is compelled to enter. He has no choice. He further makes the point that God enters the soul with his all, not a part. He gives of himself fully. You do not receive a little bit of God. This brings us to another great Eckhartian teaching, which is where he says that detachment is the highest of all the virtues. This may sound strange to us, as we probably would, if we thought about it, consider love, compassion, and humility to be the highest virtues. This is not the view of Eckhart, who emphasizes that detachment includes and is above all other virtues. In this connection, he finds that
only pure detachment surpasses all things, for all other virtues have some regard to creatures, but detachment is free of all creatures.
he recognizes that many great masters have said that love is the greatest virtue. But Eckhart says,
Love constrains me to love God, but detachment compels God to love me. God is more readily able to adapt himself to me and can more easily unite with me than I could unite with him.
the discussion on detachment could be the subject for an entire talk in itself, but I would like here to just expand a little more. The German words that Eckhart uses are Abgeschiedenheit and Gelassenheit, which have been translated as detachment and letting go, respectively. In another sermon, which is about turning out the moneylenders from the temple, he says that there is no bargaining with God. This is on account of the fact that everything that you think is yours was given to you by God, and therefore you have nothing to bargain with. However, we don't generally see it this way, and we normally believe that we possess talents, families, knowledge, etc. This needs to be seen in its correct perspective, namely that all these are God-given. Eckhart is asking us to remember that in our essence there can be no possessions of any kind. Man is made in the image of God, and God is detached. This is because God is in eternity, and in order to join with him, you must give up your attachments, which keep you firmly established in time. Eckhart goes as far to say that God is not moved by prayer, and was not moved even by the death of his son, which I suspect sounds to us as almost blasphemous. There is a story in the Indian tradition which explains the meaning of Gelassenheit, letting go. It concerns how to trap a monkey. It involves a glass container in which is placed an orange. The entrance to the container is only just large enough for the monkey to squeeze his hand through and grab the orange. However, it is not large enough for the monkey to extract his hand whilst holding the orange. All the monkey needs to do in order to be free is to let go of the orange, but he will not do so. He believes he is trapped. This is said to be similar to our condition. If only we could let go, we could be free, but somehow we cannot do it. Returning to the sermon, there follows a difficult passage, or at least I find it difficult, where he explains how in order to know anything, you first create an image of that, and you take it inwards. But the soul was never outside, and therefore no image can be made of the soul. Consequently, it cannot be known. And of this, Eckhart says,
So she, the soul, knows all other things, but not herself. Of nothing does she know so little of as herself, for want of mediation.
Eckhart is saying here that there are no senses or powers that can make an image of the soul so that it can be known.
God needs no image and has no image. Without any means, likeness, or image, God operates in the soul, right in the ground, where no image ever got in, but only he himself with his own being. This no creature can do. And therefore, there must be a silence and a stillness, and the Father must speak in that, and give birth to his Son, and perform his works free from all images.
We now move on to the second question of whether there is anything we can do to precipitate this birth of the Word. What do you think that Eckhart's answer will be? Take a moment to reflect on this. He assumes that you will be leading a good life and that you would be adhering to the teachings of Jesus Christ. And then he says,
Sorry, no, that's. They must know that the very best and noblest attainment in this life is to be silent and let God work and speak within. When the powers have been completely withdrawn from all their works and images, then the word is spoken.
a further illustration of the importance of this silence is referred to in the following quotation.
The most powerful prayer, one well nigh omnipotent, and the worthiest work of all, is the outcome of a quiet mind. The quieter the mind, the more powerful, the worthier, the deeper, the more telling and more perfect the prayer is. To the quiet mind, all things are possible.
Why would Eckhart think that silence is better than doing good works, for example? Austerities of various types were often practiced by the religious orders. But Eckhart says that if you seek God in a particular way, you end up getting the way but missing God. Later on, he says,
The further you can get from creatures and their images, the nearer you are to this, that is the birth of the word, and the readier to receive it. If only you could suddenly be unaware of all things, then you would pass into the oblivion of your own body.
Eckhart, quoting St. Paul, says of this state that
Memory no longer functioned, nor understanding, nor the senses, nor the powers.
he quotes Anselm of Canterbury, who said,
Withdraw from the unrest of external activities, then flee away and hide from the turmoil of inward thoughts.
what Eckhart is talking about cannot be known in the normal way. He describes it as an unknowing knowing, because it is beyond all our powers. He explains that we normally only know anything because we hold an image of it. God cannot coexist with images, that is, creatures. Hence, our normal mode of knowing does not work. It is only through stillness that you become closer to the ground of your being. He says,
And Christ meant this by his words: whoever abandons anything for my sake shall be repaid 100-fold, and whoever would possess me must deny himself and all things.
this is another way of expressing the meaning of detachment or letting go. Further on, he says,
Because it is so secret, this word came in the night and in darkness. St. John says, the light shone in the darkness. It came unto its own, and as many as received it became in authority sons of God. To them was given power to become God's sons.
don't we think that this is a remarkable thing for Eckhart to quote, in which he suggests that far from Jesus being the only begotten Son, we all have access to that same power. We are all sons of God. Another point he makes is that the seeking of knowledge in the normal way does not satisfy. One always wants more. There is no contentment. He says we are always clamouring to know things. But this, what he is talking about, is no thing. To quote verse 7 of the Mandukya Upanishad on what is known as the fourth state, that's normally called Turiya, but in fact, apparently although it's sometimes referred to as a state, it's not a state because it's beyond all states. The Mandukya says,
They consider the fourth to be that which is not conscious of the internal world, nor conscious of the external world, nor conscious of both worlds, nor a mass of consciousness, nor unconsciousness, nor simple consciousness, which is unseen, beyond empirical dealings, beyond the grasp of the organs of action, uninferable, unthinkable, indescribable, whose valid proof consists in the single belief in the self, in which all phenomena cease, and what is unchanging, auspicious, and non-dual. That is the self, and that is to be known.
this type of knowing cannot be acquired. Plato says something similar when he asks how we can purport to know anything when we do not know ourselves. Conversely, if we know ourselves, then we will know all things. This knowing will not be in quantity, but will be more akin to being. After hearing this, you may be wondering what the point of doing any study at all, or attending this talk. In this connection, it might help to know that according to the Hindu tradition, there are stages in attaining the understanding about which Eckhart speaks. The first of these is simply to hear about the truth in the same manner as the Beguine nuns were hearing the teaching of Meister Eckhart through his sermons. The next important stage is, having heard the teaching, to reflect deeply, which I believe was practiced regularly in religious orders. You could call this reflection or self-examination. And Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. A few years ago, I attended a class studying the Mandukya Upanishad. I attended that class for about 5 years. The Mandukya is considered to be one of the finest Sanskrit.
Neville,
Yes.
Neville, I don't know if you're scratching near the speaker.
It consists of only 12 succinct verses.
Page 8.
Yes. Each week we recited a few of the verses and looked in great detail at the meaning of the words. We often only looked at 3 or 4 of the verses during a session. After 18 months, one student asked the tutor, "Do you think we could go past verse 7 today?" At the end of each 1.5 hour lesson, we would spend the last 10 minutes in silent reflection. This was very powerful and profound. It was not until my last few months at those classes that I realized that the profundity of the silence was as a direct result of the close examination of the text. I say this because it might sound as if Eckhart is saying that nothing you can do is helpful. But inasmuch as it can bring about that stillness and knowledge of the ground of your being, it is not only helpful, but it is essential. It does not have to be the study of a sacred text. It could quite as easily be gardening, or cleaning, or cooking. But it would be good to perform these actions as an act of service, with full awareness of who you really are. Eckhart says we need to make holy what we do. The important aspect is always to remember the ground of your being and the connection of yourself and all things to God. The third question which Eckhart answers is, what are the benefits that accrue from this happening? He tells us what the fruits are that arise from the birth of this word. Eckhart's answer on this point is brief. His answer is to emphasize the vast distinction between outer and inner knowledge. Remember, outer knowledge is knowing through images, and inner knowledge is knowing through being. He makes the following point.
All the truth learnt by all the masters, by their own intellect and understanding, or ever to be learnt till doomsday, They never had the slightest inkling of this knowledge and this ground. Though it may be called a nescience, an unknowing, yet there is in it more than in all knowing and understanding without it. For this unknowing lures and attracts you from all understood things, and from yourself as well.
The supreme importance of understanding this concept is demonstrated by the following statement by Eckhart.
And in very truth, I believe, nay, I am sure, that the man who is established in this cannot in any way ever be separated from God.
The reason why one cannot be separated is because this happens in eternity and not in time. Is there any one of us who would not wish to be in a state where they can never be separated from God? Is this what is really meant by life everlasting? To summarize this sermon, the theme is the birth of the Word, and this occurs often in the sermons, as does the main instruction to leave behind all creatures and images. This is achieved by stillness and silence, which takes one inward to the ground of one's being. By emptying yourself, you are preparing the ground, and God then must enter. I would like to finish with a beautiful quotation from what are known as Eckhart's Counsels on Discernment, which were given by Eckhart to young novices whilst conversing at evening meals. After this reading, I would like to have 2 or 3 minutes of silence where we look into ourselves and, as far as possible, let the power of these words bring us to stillness and an appreciation of our own true natures. After that, we will have questions.
People ought never to think too much about what they could do, but they ought to think about what they could be. If people in their way of life were only good, what they did might be a shining example. If you are just, then your works too are just. We ought not to think about building holiness on action. We ought to build it on a way of being. For it is not what we do that makes us holy, but we ought to make holy what we do. However holy the works may be, they do not as works make us at all holy. But as we are holy and have being, to that extent we make all our works holy, be it eating, sleeping, keeping vigil, or whatever it may be. It does not matter what men may do whose being is mean. Nothing will come of it. Take good heed. We ought to do everything we can to be good. It does not matter so much what we may do or what kinds of works ours may be. What matters is the ground on which the works are built.